Do you want to see the ancient wonders of Azeroth but don't have time to level a character in Classic? I'm Hidden Azeroth, and in this episode we're exploring the original Thousand Needles on retail WoW. So to get started, you're going to need to take a Demon Hunter to Razorfern Kraal, which can be found here in the Thousand Needles. Head forward until you exit the cave and turn right, double jumping and using Fell Rush to push yourself up onto the cliff face. Now gradually move your character forward up the cliff face while jumping rapidly until you reach the invisible ceiling. Use your Vrykul Drinking Horn and exit the game 3/4 of the way through the cast. Once you've logged back in, you should be able to double jump through the invisible ceiling and escape the dungeon. Turning around, we can see the network of vines that makes up the roof of Razorfern Kraal. The entire dungeon is located inside a giant stone crater, and using a few more jumps we can get out of it and explore what lies beyond. The first thing of note is that there's a copy of a road leading up to the instance portal. This is so that players inside the dungeon can look through the portal and see what appears to be the normal outdoor zone they just entered through. Make sure not to get too close or you'll be ported out of the dungeon and back into Kalimdor. Interestingly, despite this small section of road being the only part of the outdoor world visible from inside the dungeon, the developers still included a considerable portion of the Thousand Needles and the Barrens. This road would have originally led to the Razorfern Downs entrance and a sprawling Quillbore village, but neither were included in the dungeon. Heading north towards the Barrens, one thing worth noting is that some of the shrubbery and trees found by the entrance portal of the instance are missing, and yet some of the foliage in the Barrens, which players would never be able to normally see, has still been included. As we travel to the corner of the map, now seems like a good time for some fun Barrens trivia. Before it was split apart in Cataclysm, the Barrens was one of the largest zones in Azeroth. It also had the widest level range of any vanilla zone, offering quests from levels 10 to 25. And I will continue where this trivia is going in just a moment because we're coming up on the corner of a map. Turning our camera, we can see that one edge of a map ends in a sheer untextured drop, while the other is cut off in an invisible sticky wall. Returning to the Barrens trivia, take the information I told you a moment ago and combine it with the knowledge that due to its proximity to Orgrimmar, the zone was also frequently traveled by max level Horde players. Now if you're watching this channel, you're most likely at least familiar with the infamous Barrens chat of vanilla WoW. But the reason this chat was one that was so active was because all the factors mentioned before contributed to this zone being one of the most active Horde zones in WoW. And unlike in Orgrimmar, where people were normally busy listing auctions or assembling groups, the people in the Barrens were either questing or riding their mounts, which meant they usually had time to talk to one another in the chat. On an unrelated note, can someone please whisper me where the heck Mankrik's wife is, cause I still can't find her. Up ahead, we're approaching the Great Lift, the original way players traveled to and from the Thousand Needles. The lift suspended 2 elevator cars which would constantly carry players up and down between the zones. Also, this is completely speculation, but the orientation of the horns on the totem pole and the way the 2 elevators float makes me suspect that originally they were supposed to have chains suspending them. Again, much like the elevators, nothing actually supports this theory, this is just a speculation I have. Having reached the bottom of the lift, we can jump onto the platform in front of it and look back up. As iconic as it was in early World of Warcraft, the Great Lift was destroyed during the Cataclysm, and its shattered remains can still be found in the live version of Thousand Needles. Jumping off the platform and moving ahead, we can see the corpse of a dwarf, which uses the original game's dwarf model. This corpse can still be found on the current version of Thousand Needles, submerged underwater, and despite dwarves receiving a model update in Warlords of Draenor, it still uses the original skeleton. For a sense of scale, according to the WoW Traveler book, it would take a human 2 weeks to walk from one end of the Thousand Needles to the other. Using the average human long-distance walking speed of 25 miles a day, we can calculate that this would mean that Thousand Needles is 350 miles long. I'm going to interrupt this trivia for a moment to point out that we're currently riding through the Centaur settlement of Camp Ethok. Much like the Great Lift, Camp Ethok is destroyed during the Cataclysm, and its ruins can be found submerged on live. Exiting Camp Ethok, we come across the main road which would lead players from the Speedway to Feralis. Looking up ahead, we can see one of the stacked rock formations which once decorated Thousand Needles. This one particular model of rock formation wobbles back and forth constantly. Up ahead, we can see the original zone transition from Thousand Needles to Feralis. In Cataclysm, this portion of Feralis is flooded, and the Night Elf town of Falanar has been destroyed by the waves. Let's take a quick moment to appreciate this very seamless zone transition. Continuing along this road for a few hundred more feet, we reach the westernmost edge of a map that's included inside the dungeon. Looking past the edge, we can see that just like on the northernmost side of the Barrens, this portion of the map ends in an invisible sticky wall. Just turning around, WoW's early zone transitions really were something else. It cracks me up how blatantly we go from this lush jungle to a complete desert. Anyway, heading back down the hill, we find that most of Falanar is missing, with the exception of the very outskirts of town where the old Flightmaster was. A lot of Azeroth was changed in the Cataclysm, and it's easy to feel nostalgic for a version of a world that many of us grew up with. So whether you're an avid explorer, or you're still just looking for Mankrik's wife, the original Azeroth inside of Razorfern Kraal is well worth a visit. And as always, thanks for watching.